I held up the two house keys side by side. Identical in every way, except one opened our front door on Maple Street, and the other. That one opened the door to my father's second life. The life where he wasn't Robert Brown, my dad, but Bob Wilson, someone else's husband. I wish I could say that was the worst of what I discovered, but some family secrets run so deep they poison the roots of everything you thought was real. My name is Melissa Brown. I'm 34, and until 6 months ago I thought I knew my family. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, in a beautiful colonial home with my parents, Robert and Catherine, and my younger brother, James. Dad ran a successful investment firm, and Mom was a part-time art teacher at the local community college, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. That facade shattered during my parents' 35th anniversary dinner. I had organized everything: the private room at Savannah's, their favorite restaurant, the champagne toast, even a slideshow of their life together. As I stood up to give my speech, glass raised, the restaurant doors swung open. She wasn't particularly striking, a woman in her early 50s, brunette, wearing a simple black dress. But the look on her face was unmistakable, determination mixed with fury. "Which one of you is Robert Brown?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Dad's face drained of all color. That's when I knew something terrible was about to happen. "I'm his wife," the woman said, walking closer to our table. "My name is Diana Wilson. I've been married to this man for 32 years. The restaurant went silent. James dropped his fork. Mom sat there, staring at her anniversary cake, her expression completely blank. "Security," the manager called, rushing over. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." As they escorted her out, she shouted, "Ask him about the house on Cedar Lane. Ask him about his other family." Dad tried to laugh it off. "Some crazy woman," he said. "Probably confused me with someone else." But I saw the way Mom's hands trembled as she folded her napkin. She didn't look shocked. She looked resigned. That night, while Dad was in the shower, I checked his wallet. I don't know what made me do it, intuition maybe. And there they were, two house keys, identical except for small colored dots on the heads. One red, one blue. Our house key had a red dot. I'd never noticed it before. I took the blue-dotted key and made a copy the next day. Something told me I'd need it. For the next week, I watched Dad closely. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he said he had late client meetings. The following Thursday, I followed him. He didn't go to his office downtown. Instead, he drove to Cedar Lane, a neighborhood about 20 minutes from ours, and pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story house. Through the front window, I watched him kiss Diana, the woman from the restaurant. A teenage boy, maybe 17, bounded down the stairs and hugged Dad. My father has another son. I felt like I was watching someone else's life through a window, except that someone was my father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike and checked under my bed for monsters. Hello, everyone. I know this story is getting started, but if you're feeling as shocked as I was, please hit that like button. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever discovered someone close to you was living a double life? Let me continue the story. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Dad's other family in my mind, his other wife, his other son. It was like looking at a funhouse mirror version of our life. I wanted to confront him immediately, but something held me back. A voice in my head kept repeating what Diana had said. Ask him about his other family. Not another wife, a family. The next day, I called in sick to work. As soon as Dad left and Mom headed to her art class, I drove to Cedar Lane. The house was empty. Using the copied key, I let myself in, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. The living room was cozy, filled with family photos. I picked up one from a shelf, Dad, Diana, and a boy at what looked like a high school graduation. The boy was younger, maybe 14. The frame was engraved. Tyler's middle school graduation. Tyler, I have a half-brother named Tyler. But it was the next photo that made my knees buckle. It showed a family of 4, Dad, Diana, teenage Tyler, and a young woman about my age. The woman looked disturbingly familiar. She had my eyes, my chin, my smile. The frame read, Emily's college graduation. I had a half-sister too, and she looked like she could be my twin. I searched through drawers, finding bank statements, tax returns, all under the name Robert Wilson. Dad had created an entirely separate identity. His company matched the name of Dad's firm, but with associates added to the end. He was essentially running two parallel companies, one as Robert Brown and one as Bob Wilson. In the master bedroom, I found a photo album. Inside were pictures chronicling a whole other life. Dad teaching Tyler to fish, Dad dancing with Emily at what looked like a wedding, and Dad and Diana renewing their vows on a beach. Then I found something that stopped my heart, a family photo from 30 years ago. Dad, Diana, baby Tyler, and my mother standing off to the side looking uncomfortable but smiling. Mom knew. She had always known. I was so shocked I nearly missed hearing the front door open. Scrambling, I hid in the closet just as someone entered the bedroom. Through the slats, I saw her, Diana, putting away laundry, humming softly. Up close, she seemed kind and normal. She wasn't some homewrecker or villain from a Lifetime movie. She was just a wife, my father's other wife. After she left the room, I slipped out of the house, my mind racing. Back home, I went straight to my old bedroom, which Mom had kept exactly as it was when I moved out. Under my bed was a box of childhood memorabilia, report cards, artwork, birthday cards. I flipped through birthday cards from Dad, studying the handwriting. Then I found one from when I turned 16 that looked different. The signature was the same, but the message was in another hand. I compared it to a Mother's Day card I had kept. It was Mom's handwriting. Had my mother been forging cards for my father when he was with his other family? How deep did this deception go? I needed more information, but I couldn't let either of my parents know I was investigating. I decided to start with the one person who might have answers but wouldn't immediately report back to my parents. My brother, James. James lived in Norfolk, about 2 hours away. I called him and suggested a weekend visit, trying to sound casual. When I arrived at his apartment, I didn't waste any time. "Did you know Dad has another family?" I asked as soon as he closed the door. James froze, then sank onto his couch. "How did you find out?" The betrayal hit like a physical blow. "You knew, for how long?" "Since college," he admitted, not meeting my eyes. "I found some weird bank statements when I was helping Dad with taxes. I followed him one day, like you probably did." "And you never told me. Never thought your sister deserved to know her whole life was a lie." I was shouting now, and tears streamed down my face. "Mel, it's more complicated than that," James said. "Mom made me promise not to tell you." "Mom knows. Of course she knows she's been covering for him." "No, Mel, Mom doesn't know she helped arrange it." My world tilted. "What are you talking about?" James took a deep breath. "Dad married Diana first. They had Tyler, and then Emily was born. Then he met Mom at a business conference. They had an affair. When Mom got pregnant with me, she threatened to expose Dad unless he married her too." I stared at my brother, unable to process what he was saying. That's insane. Mom would never." "Mom was obsessed with Dad. She knew he wouldn't leave his family, so she created this arrangement. 2 separate lives, 2 separate families. She gets him half the time. Diana gets him the other half." "But I'm older than you," I said, my mind racing to make sense of the timeline. "I was born before the affair." James looked away. "Mel, you should talk to Mom about that." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "What aren't you telling me, James?" "It's not my place to." "Tell me." I slammed my hand on his coffee table, making us both jump. "You're not Dad's biological daughter," he said quietly. "Mom was married before, briefly. Her ex-husband is your biological father." The room spun. I gripped the edge of the couch to steady myself. "That's not possible. Dad and Mom have been married for 35 years. I'm 34. They've been presenting as married for 35 years. Legally, they've been married for 32 years since before I was born. Mom's first marriage was annulled, and they rewrote the history, created a new timeline. Dad adopted you legally, but kept it quiet." I thought back to the woman at the restaurant, Diana, saying she'd been married to Dad for 32 years. the same length as my parents' legal marriage. They'd been living parallel lives, complete with overlapping anniversaries. "So my whole life is a lie," I whispered. "Everything I thought I knew about our family." "Not everything," James said, reaching for my hand. "Dad loves you. He chose to be your father." "By lying to me every day of my life." I pulled my hand away. "And what about my biological father? Who is he? Where is he?" James shook his head. "I don't know. Mom never talks about him." That weekend, I learned more from James. Mom had been 23 when she had me. Her first marriage fell apart almost immediately. She met Dad at an art exhibition where she was showing her work. He was there with Diana, but Mom pursued him aggressively. When she got pregnant with James, she threatened to tell Diana everything unless Dad married her too. The arrangement they worked out was bizarrely methodical. Dad would spend 3 nights a week at each house, with Sundays rotating. Business trips provided cover for longer absences. He maintained 2 separate identities, 2 separate careers, though they were interconnected, and 2 separate bank accounts. "But how did no one ever find out?" I asked. "In all these years?" "They were careful," James said. "We lived in different school districts, different social circles. Dad made sure his 2 worlds never overlapped." "Until Diana showed up at the anniversary dinner," I said. "What changed?" "I don't know," James admitted. "Something must have happened." I left James's place more confused than ever. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about my biological father. Who was he? Did he know about me? Why had my mother erased him so completely from my life? Back in Richmond, I started digging. I requested my birth certificate, the real one, not the amended version that would have been created after Dad's adoption. I searched through Mom's old things in the attic, finding boxes of art supplies and journals from her college days. In one journal dated before I was born, I found entries about a man named Daniel Hayes. Mom wrote about his beautiful eyes and how she could see them in our baby's face. I had a name. Finding Daniel Hayes proved surprisingly easy. He still lived in Virginia, outside of Charlottesville, where he taught English at a community college. His social media showed a kind-faced man in his late 50s with a wife and 3 teenage children, my half-siblings. I debated contacting him, but first, I needed to understand more about my mother's role in all this. I'd always seen Mom as somewhat passive, the artistic, dreamy counterpoint to Dad's practical business mind. Now I was seeing a different side of her, calculating, manipulative, and willing to share her husband if it meant getting what she wanted. One Tuesday, when I knew Dad would be at his other home, I invited myself over for dinner with Mom. As we ate, I casually mentioned I'd been going through old photos. "I found something interesting," I said, keeping my voice light. "A receipt for Dad's watch from 33 years ago, but you guys have been married for 35 years. Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, he must have replaced his original watch. The engraving says, on our wedding day. Why would he replace a wedding gift with the same model?" Mom set down her fork. "What are you really asking, Melissa?" "I know about Deanna," I said. "I know about Tyler and Emily. I know everything." The color drained from Mom's face. She looked suddenly older, smaller. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." James filled in some details. James had no right. "I had every right to know my entire life is a lie," I snapped. "That my father has another family, that you've been sharing him like a timeshare property, that you manipulated him into this twisted arrangement." Mom's eyes hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Robert and I love each other." "If he loved you, he wouldn't need Diana." "He loves us both, in different ways." Mom's voice was eerily calm. "Our arrangement has worked for 32 years. "And what about Daniel Hayes?" I asked. Mom froze. "Where did you hear that name?" "Your journals. He's my real father, isn't he?" For a long moment, Mom said nothing. Then, "Daniel was a mistake, a brief relationship that gave me you. Robert is your father in all the ways that matter." "Did Daniel know about me? Does he know that I exist?" Mom looked away. "I told him I miscarried." The casual cruelty of it stunned me. You lied to him about his own child. Why? Because I didn't want to share you. Mom's voice rose. Daniel was immature and unreliable. Robert was established and successful. He could give us both the life we deserved. The life you deserve, I corrected. What about what I deserve, like knowing my real father? Robert is your real father. No, he's the man who lied to me my entire life, who pretended to be someone he's not. Mom stood up, her chair scraping loudly. You need to stop this, Melissa. You'll destroy everything. You already did that, I said, rising to face her. The moment you decided that your obsession with Dad was more important than the truth. I left her house that night with more questions than answers. But one thing was becoming clear. My mother wasn't complicit in Dad's double life. She was an architect of it. Over the next few weeks, I dug deeper. I hired a private investigator to look into my father's businesses. I learned that Robert Brown Investment Strategies and Robert Wilson Associates were essentially the same company with different client lists. Dad had been laundering money between them, using one to support the other during downturns, hiding assets from both wives. I also started watching the house on Cedar Lane. I learned Diana's routines, saw Tyler come and go, and occasionally glimpsed my half-sister Emily when she visited. They seemed so normal, so much like us. Did they know about our family, or were they in the dark like I had been? One day, while watching the house, someone tapped on my car window. I jumped, then felt my heart stop as I found myself face to face with Emily Wilson. You're not as subtle as you think, she said, her voice identical to mine in pitch and tone. You've been watching our house for weeks. I rolled down the window. How did you know who I am? Are you kidding? We could be twins. She gestured between our faces. Plus, I've known about you my whole life. The shock must have shown on my face because Emily laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Oh my God, you didn't know about us, did you? Dad told us all about his other family. He said you knew too. I found out, I admitted, after your mom came to my parents' anniversary dinner. Emily winced. Yeah, that was. Mom finally had enough. Dad promised to leave your mother years ago, but he always had excuses. Wait, I said, trying to process this new information. Your mother knew about us, but thought Dad was going to leave Mom. That was always the plan, according to Mom. Dad was supposedly trapped in his marriage to your mother, who threatened to destroy his business if he left. I laughed incredulously. That's rich. Our mother told us he was trapped in his marriage to your mother. Emily leaned against my car. So they both lied. Typical. Want to compare notes? I asked, unlocking my car doors. I'll buy you coffee. That coffee with Emily changed everything. As we talked, we realized we had been fed mirror image lies our entire lives. Where my mother had painted herself as the victim of circumstance who had made the best of a bad situation, Diana had been told the same story with the roles reversed. Dad had been playing both women against each other for decades, telling each that he would leave the other when the time was right. He's been stealing from both families, I told Emily. The investment firm is one entity, split into two on paper. He moves money around to maintain both households. That explains the financial trouble we've been having, Emily said. Mom has been complaining about Dad cutting back on expenses, claiming his business is struggling. Meanwhile, he just bought Mom a new car, I added. Emily and I met regularly after that. We were drawn to each other, not just by our shared predicament, but by a genuine connection. We had the same laugh, the same mannerisms. We had both studied business in college. We both loved old black-and-white movies and hated cilantro. It's weird, Emily said during one of our meetings. I always felt like I was missing something, like I had a phantom limb. Now I know it was you. Through Emily, I eventually met Tyler. He was sullen at first, angry that his family was falling apart. But as we talked, he admitted he'd suspected something was wrong for years. Dad was always so secretive about his work, Tyler said. And those business trips that never seemed to line up with actual business events. Together, the three of us, the children of Robert Brown Wilson, began to form a plan. Not to expose our father, but to dismantle the elaborate fiction he'd built around himself, to make him face the consequences of his decades of deception. But first, I had one more piece of my personal puzzle to solve. I needed to meet Daniel Hayes, my biological father. I drove to Charlottesville one Friday afternoon, my stomach in knots. I'd emailed Daniel, saying only that I had information about Catherine Brown, my mother's maiden name, from 34 years ago. He'd agreed to meet me at a cafe near his campus. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He had my eyes, or rather, I had his. He stood as I approached, looking confused. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Melissa Brown." "Please call me Daniel. How do you know Catherine?" I took a deep breath. "She's my mother, and according to her journals, you're my father." Daniel's face went through a series of emotions, shock, disbelief, and then something like wonder. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Catherine lost the baby. She miscarried at 4 months." "She lied," I said gently. "She met another man, Robert Brown, and wanted him to believe I was hers." Daniel sat heavily, staring at me. "You're 34. I nodded. "My God," he breathed, "you look like my mother." Tears filled his eyes as he studied my face. "All these years, I mourned that baby. I've thought about what might have been." We talked for hours. Daniel told me about his brief marriage to my mother, her intensity, her artistic passion, and ultimately her manipulation and lies. They had been young and impulsive, married after just 3 months of dating. When she got pregnant, he was overjoyed, but Catherine became distant. Then came the call about the miscarriage, followed quickly by the divorce papers. "I was devastated," Daniel said. "I wanted that baby so much. I wanted you." By the end of our conversation, I felt a connection to this man I'd never known, this man who should have been my father. We promised to keep in touch, to build some kind of relationship. Before I left, he hugged me tightly. "I would have loved you," he whispered. "I would have been there for every birthday, every skinned knee, every triumph." "I know," I said, and realized I meant it. Armed with the truth about my own origins, I returned to Richmond ready to execute the plan Emily, Tyler, and I had developed. We called it Operation Glasshouse, because our father's carefully constructed double life was about to shatter. First, we needed evidence. Emily had access to Diana's financial records, while I gathered information from my mother's accounts. Tyler, who worked in IT, helped us trace the complex web of our father's business dealings. What we found was astounding. Not only was Dad stealing from both families, but he had been embezzling from his clients for years, using a sophisticated shell game to hide the money. We also discovered something none of us expected: a third property, a luxury condo in Virginia Beach, registered to Robert Wilson Brown. Inside, according to the private investigator we hired, lived a 28-year-old woman named Amber Collins and her 5-year-old daughter, Lily. Dad had yet another family, a much younger girlfriend and a child none of us knew about. "How many lives is he living?" Emily asked when I showed her the report. "And how many more don't we know about?" Tyler added. The discovery of Amber and Lily changed our approach. This wasn't about exposing Dad's double life anymore. It was about stopping a pattern of deception that could potentially hurt even more people. We decided to confront both our mothers together, show them the evidence, and give them a chance to join forces against Dad. It was a risky move. These women had been unwitting rivals for decades, but we needed their cooperation for our plan to work. The meeting was as tense as you might expect. Mom and Diana sat on opposite ends of my living room, sizing each other up like territorial cats. Emily, Tyler, and I presented our findings methodically: the financial records, the business improprieties, and finally, the evidence of Amber and Lily. That last revelation broke something in both women. Mom's composure cracked, and she began to cry silently. Diana paced the room, cursing Dad in colorful terms. "All these years," Mom said eventually, "I thought I was the one he came home to, that Diana was the obligation and I was the choice." "He told me exactly the same thing about you," Diana said, her voice hollow. As the two women began to talk, really talk, for the first time, a strange thing happened. Despite 30 years of being pitted against each other, they found common ground in their shared betrayal. By the end of the night, they were sitting side by side on the couch, looking at old photos and filling in the blanks of their parallel lives. "He told you I knew about the arrangement?" Mom asked Diana in disbelief. "He said you suggested it," Diana confirmed. "That you preferred having him part-time to not having him at all." "The bastard," Mom whispered. "The absolute bastard." With Mom and Diana on board, our plan expanded. Diana, who had worked as Dad's bookkeeper at Robert Wilson Associates, had access to client records that proved the financial misconduct. Mom, who had managed the household accounts for decades, had evidence of money movements that made no sense unless you knew about the double life. The final piece was Amber. Emily and I visited her together, two identical-looking women showing up on her doorstep. Her confusion quickly turned to horror as we explained who we were. Unlike our mothers, Amber truly had no idea about Dad's other families. She thought he was divorced, a busy executive who could only see her and Lily on specific days due to his demanding travel schedule. 5 years, she kept saying. 5 years of my life, and everything he told me was a lie. Amber's pain was raw, immediate, not dulled by decades like our mothers. But her anger burned as brightly. When we told her our plan, she didn't hesitate to join us. "He won't see it coming," she said, bouncing Lily on her hip. "He thinks I'm a pretty young thing with no brain. Let me show him how wrong he is." The day of reckoning came 6 weeks later, at the annual Client Appreciation Gala for Robert Brown Investment Strategies. Dad had invited all his biggest clients, business associates, and of course, Mom and me. What he didn't know was that Diana, Emily, Tyler, and Amber would also be attending. I watched from across the ballroom as Dad worked the crowd, charm personified. He looked so confident, so in control. He had no idea his carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. The plan unfolded perfectly. First, Mom approached him with a client who had questions about their portfolio. As Dad launched into his usual reassurances, Diana appeared at his elbow with another client, calling him Bobby and acting as though nothing was amiss. Dad's face went slack with shock, his eyes darting between the two women. Before he could recover, Emily and I flanked him, identical bookends to his rapidly unraveling lie. Tyler joined us, followed by Amber with little Lily in her arms. "Robert," Mom said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "your family would like a word." The room quieted as people sensed something dramatic unfolding. Dad tried to pull us aside to contain the situation, but we stood firm. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the now attentive crowd, "my name is Melissa Brown. This is my half-sister, Emily Wilson. We're both daughters of the man you know as Robert Brown, or possibly Robert Wilson, depending on which of his businesses manages your money." Emily took over seamlessly. "For over 30 years, our father has been living a double life, 2 wives, 2 families, 2 identities, and recently we discovered a third." She gestured to Amber, who stepped forward with Lily. Dad lunged for the microphone, but Tyler blocked his path. "Don't bother, Dad. The SEC agents are already here." It was true. As we spoke, federal agents were moving through the crowd, some heading straight for Dad, others securing exits. We'd turned over evidence of Dad's financial crimes weeks earlier, coordinating with authorities for this very moment. "This isn't just about his personal deceptions," Mom added, her voice steady. "Robert has been misappropriating client funds for years, moving money between his 2 firms to cover his tracks." Diana held up a flash drive. "All the evidence is here, every transaction, every false statement, every lie." As the agents handcuffed Dad, the look he gave us was one of pure betrayal, as if we were the ones who had done something wrong. But it was the fear in his eyes that told the real story. He knew it was over. The empire of lies he'd built was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In the aftermath, the story exploded across Richmond. "Investment advisor's double life exposed by his children," read the headlines. Dad was facing many federal charges for securities fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion. Both his businesses were shut down, and their assets were frozen. But the legal consequences were the beginning. The social fallout was even more dramatic. Dad had been a pillar of two separate communities, a respected businessman and a family man. Now he was a pariah, a cautionary tale, the subject of gossip and scorn. Mom, Diana, and Amber formed an unlikely alliance, working with lawyers to salvage what they could from the financial wreckage. The courts eventually ruled that all three women were entitled to portions of Dad's assets, though much would go to repaying defrauded clients. As for me, I found something unexpected in the ruins of my former life, a new family. Emily and I grew closer each day, making up for 34 years of lost sisterhood. Tyler became the brother I always wished James had been. Even little Lily attached herself to me, calling me Auntie Melly and demanding piggyback rides. Daniel Hayes, my biological father, became a steady presence in my life. We had lunch every other weekend, slowly building the relationship we should have had all along. His wife, Karen, welcomed me warmly, and my half-siblings on that side were curious and kind. The final confrontation came when I visited Dad in jail while he awaited trial. He looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, his confident facade stripped away. "Why did you come?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. "I needed to understand," I said. "How could you live like that for so many years? Didn't the lying eat at you?" Dad was quiet for a long moment. At first, it was overwhelming. I'd wake up sometimes not knowing which house I was in, but then it got easier. Compartmentalizing became second nature. "But why? Why not choose?" "I loved them both," he said simply. Catherine was excited and passionate. Diana was steady and nurturing. I couldn't bear to lose either one. "So instead, you betrayed them both, and us." Dad finally looked at me. "I never meant to hurt you, Melissa. Everything I did for you was real, the father-daughter dances, the college tuition, walking you down the aisle. I loved being your father." "But you weren't really there," I said, feeling tears start. "Half your life was somewhere else, and you lied to me every single day." "Would knowing the truth have made your childhood better?" he challenged. "Would you have preferred growing up knowing your father had another family to which he went home?" "I would have preferred the truth," I said firmly. "However painful it may be, at least it would have been real." As I stood to leave, Dad called after me. "I did love you, Melissa. That was never a lie." I paused at the door. "The problem isn't that you didn't love us enough, Dad. It's that you loved yourself more." 6 months later, Dad pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for helping authorities recover funds for his clients. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The man who had once commanded respect wherever he went now spent his days in a cell, his empire of lies reduced to ashes. Mom sold our family home and moved to a small apartment near her art studio. Without Dad's shadow looming over her life, she seemed lighter somehow, more authentic. She still struggled with guilt over keeping me from Daniel, but she was working to make amends. Diana kept the house on Cedar Lane, where Emily often stayed when visiting Richmond. She and Mom had developed an unlikely friendship, bonded by their shared experiences of betrayal and recovery. Amber took Lily and moved to North Carolina to be near her parents, but she kept in touch, sending photos of Lily growing up. We made sure Dad's youngest daughter would have college funds waiting for her, money protected from the fallout of his crimes. As for me, I found myself changed in ways I never expected. The anger that had driven me to expose Dad's lies gradually gave way to something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Dad had created a life so compartmentalized that it eventually shattered under its own weight. His punishment wasn't prison. It was knowing that he had lost everyone who had ever loved him. In the end, our revenge wasn't about destroying Dad. It was about freeing ourselves from the web of lies he'd spun around all of us. By exposing the truth, we reclaimed our own stories. I sometimes wonder if Dad ever truly understood the damage he caused. If, in his quieter moments, he regrets the choices that led him here. But I've stopped waiting for an apology that will never come. Instead, I focus on building something real with the family I've found: Emily, Tyler, Daniel, and all the others who entered my life when the lies fell away. They say the truth sets you free. What they don't mention is how painful that freedom can be at first, like blood rushing back into a limb that's fallen asleep. It hurts, but it means you're finally awake. I was my father's secret keeper for 34 years without ever knowing it. Now I keep only my own truths and I wear them openly, like badges of honor. Because some family trees don't grow straight. They twist and turn, grafting new branches onto old wounds. But in the end, they still reach for the light. If this story resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my future stories. Your support means everything to this channel. And remember, sometimes the families we choose are more real than the ones we're born into. Thanks for listening to my story.